Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Zend webinar. Today we've got Alan Seiden. He's a PHP on IBM consultant and developer. Man, 15 seconds in, I've already messed the name up. He will be talking to us about building your first Zend framework project on the IBM I. So before we actually get going, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded. So if you want to see it again, or if you want to watch a video of it, it will be available on the Zend.com website. If you don't want to be perusing the Zend.com website, what you can do is you can also go to our Facebook page and like us on Facebook. And as soon as I get a link for the recording, I'll post the link up there on Facebook as well, so you can see it there and watch it as many times as you like. The next thing to talk about is questions. I am sure that you will have questions. And if you do have any questions, make sure that you put them into the Q&A panel on your WebEx bar. And what that will allow you to do then is, as we go through the presentation, we'll kind of wait until the end. But if you put your questions in, we can address them individually, and we can check them off as we go through the questions. So if you have a question, put it into the Q&A panel. But we will wait until the end of the presentation to actually answer those. That way Alan can go through and give his presentation without interruption, unless it's something really significant that I need to interrupt him for. But we'll pretty much let him do his presentation, and then we'll take questions at the end. So with that, I would like to pass it off to... Sorry, I muted myself. Pass it off to Alan and take it from there.
To you about how to create your first Zend framework project, which is a big moment for a lot of people. And yes, there will be questions. I'll allow about 15 minutes at the end or so. And I created this presentation because a lot of people have gotten a lot of experience with PHP on the IBM I. They're getting good. They want to use Zend framework. They understand some of the principles, but have trouble connecting the dots, getting the various pieces to work together. So I wanted to put all those together for you so there's one reference for it. And yes, the slides will be online. They'll be on my website immediately. They'll be on Zend's website as a recording very soon. So you don't have to feverishly take notes on what you see here. You'll be able to look it up later. So you can just relax and get the overall feeling, the overall flow and structure of it without having to sweat the details. So I work for Strategic Business Systems in Ramsey, New Jersey. We're an IBM business partner. We've been doing web development, specializing on the I for a while, and consulting. And they were good enough to recognize the value of PHP. And I'm very happy to be doing PHP on the I really all the time. Since PHP came out on the I, or even before, I've been involved because I thought it was such a great idea. I helped with the IBM Red Book that first came out. I got certified in Zend Framework, and I worked on a project that won an award from Common using Zend Framework actually on the IBM I. So there's good precedent for really successful projects through PHP and Zend Framework on the I. And here's my contact information, and it'll be available all later as well. The presentations will be on my site on SlideShare, and I'll put a link to the Zend site webinar recording whenever it comes up, so you can look there. And those of you on my mailing list, I'll also send you a link to the recording when it's up. I'm giving talks in Framingham, Massachusetts, and at Common. I'll actually be doing this talk there, and so any feedback you give me, I will incorporate. Those of you in the New York City area, stop by once a month for the Zend Framework meetup. If you have any questions about anything, bring your laptop. We'll work through it and answer your questions. There really is a great community that's evolving around Zend Framework. So those of you who are new to Zend Framework or just want a refresher, here's some basics. You know that it's not only to help you develop PHP, but it's built in PHP. In fact, Zend Framework was created to teach people what PHP is capable of, in particular PHP version 5. Using object-oriented practices. So it's really a learning tool as well as a development tool. So I feel that any time you spend with Zend Framework will be leveraged many-fold through a learning process. It is free. It works in any system, not just the IBM I. It works almost anywhere that PHP works. And there's a full-time staff of Zend employees as well as people in the community who help, and Microsoft, other companies who want their products to be compatible with Zend Framework. And it's really, really popular. There used to be a controversy about whether Zend Framework is a real framework or not. I think that controversy has been settled. It's both a component library and a full framework. That is, a lot of people enjoy using separate components, like to send email or create PDFs or do web services. But in addition, your whole PHP application can be based in Zend Framework. It gives you a structure. And I like to say that when you feel like you need a framework, then you know you need it. Like, it's no need to jump in prematurely, but once your applications get to a certain complexity, it becomes much easier to use a framework that divides the sections. So here's what the directory structure looks like. I'm not going to go into much detail about what model view and controller is, but it's the dominant web application structure today, not just with Zend Framework, with really all the frameworks, almost all the frameworks. The model is routines and functions that bring your data back to you, mainly. The view is your HTML or any other way that you want to create output. And then separated from that is the controller or controllers, which determine the flow of your application. It does validation. It really controls all the other elements. So this is split into three to make maintenance easier. Now in Zend Framework, there's a public folder, which some of you may know. You want to limit the number of web accessible folders that you have in any site, because otherwise someone might surf to a script by mistake and trigger something you don't want. So you try to limit the number of public PHP files that are out there. And Zend Framework uses what's called a front controller to do that with one script called index.php. All your other scripts will get more or less included along the way. So down below, that's the directory structure, which you will become very, very familiar with as you go along. It's flexible. It can contain a number of different elements, but this is the basic structure here. And we'll show you how to build it today. Another question people ask is, well, aren't there two different versions of Zend Framework? There's a CE, and then there's the one you pay for. What's going on? Somebody actually asked me that at my last meetup, Zend Framework meetup. I said, no. Zend Server is the basic PHP product that you install to get PHP functionality on IBM I, or you could even use it on other systems too. And there is a free edition called Community Edition, and then a regular one that you pay for that gives you more and more value, like code tracing and debugging and other features that are really great. And actually, they work really well with Zend Framework, because the Zend Framework has these various classes that do work for you. And if you use code tracing, it'll show you the whole stack of what's going on. So it's very nice. But the confusion is because Zend Server installs a copy of Zend Framework on your system by default, which is convenient, but it just confuses people. And then the Zend Studio, that's the IDE where you actually type your code, and if you don't want to use Notepad, and we're lucky on IBM I, we get a free copy. But Zend Studio also installs a copy of Zend Framework on your PC. That allows you to have code completion through Zend Studio and other things. It just makes it convenient. So there's some confusion there, because both of these install a copy, and then Zend Framework itself can work just about anywhere. But especially it integrates well with the two products above. So hope that's clear. Maybe it's not. I hear everybody laughing. Even though I can't hear, but I'm imagining it. So, okay, you'll have a lot of resources to learn Zend Framework, and today I'm not teaching it. I don't have time to teach it. I'm just showing how to set up a basic project. But I want you to know there are many resources to learn Zend Framework. There are two excellent and different tutorials on the web. There's online training. Zend offers excellent online training. Also, Jeff Olin does it through System I Network. There may even be more. There are the forums at Zend's website. And then there's a new page provided by Zend that lists all the user groups. So I think that's a wonderful way to learn and to feel connected. You're not alone. We all have to follow the same steps to obtain mastery in PHP or Zend Framework. So get to know other people who are on the same path. The first step is installing Zend Framework. But I can hear some of you saying, you just said it was installed already. That's right. It is installed already, and there's no need to install something new at first. And that first bullet point is showing you that it's installed already in this directory on your IFS under the Zend Server directory, share Zend Framework, and then you'll get to know this library/Zend is really where the Zend code is stored. And you don't even have to do anything else, but you could update your code by going to the Zend Framework site and downloading the latest. You could unzip and copy into that Zend folder I showed you above. There's a pair channel. I don't think it's an official one, but it exists if you're interested in that. And then there's a great blog posting by Mike Pavlak that gives you more information on how to update Zend Framework when you want to update it. And just a bit more about the default installation that Zend Server provides. As I said, it's totally fine, and it's really convenient. The reason it doesn't take any extra work for you to use it is because if you ever look in your php.ini file, it includes a variable called includePath that tells your applications where it can find various code libraries. And in this case, it actually refers to the Zend Framework folder. So you don't have to set up any path or anything. It's done for you. Another example of the integration that you have is if you go into Zend Server and you look on the dashboard and there's a system overview, there's a link here that shows you what version of Zend Framework you have. Or not a link, but a label. In this case, you can see it says 1.11.3. When I updated my Zend Framework, that automatically updated. So that's just a handy tool for you. And now you know how to get Zend Framework, which is that you probably already have it if you've installed Zend Server. So now let's see how to set it up step by step. And these are the steps we'll follow. First, you need a way for your Zend Studio, that is your IDE on your computer, your desktop, to connect to the IBM I. And SSH is, I think, at this point, the best way to do it. In the past, originally I used not a shared folder, a map drive. I would map a drive like X and use that, but it was pretty slow. It worked, but it was slow. Then I started using FTP. That was better, but it's still kind of slow and not that stable. The way to do it now is SSH, which uses an SFTP protocol to transfer, and that's the most secure. And anyway, I'll talk more about it later, but you set it up on your IBM I as a server and Zend Studio as your client, and then they can talk. And there's some actually great benefits to setting up SSH. I recommend you do it and you learn about it because you'll find it's really one of the most popular protocols now. You'll use it in other projects as well as with PHP. Okay, once you've done that, you can create a project directory. Then there's a component called Zend Tool that will help generate a skeleton project for you, so you don't have to keep reading the documentation and figure out how to set up the folders the way you used to. Configure Apache, which is another possibly tricky point that we will make clear today. Your project will work, and then I'll give you a bonus, which is showing you how to use DB2 with Zend Framework, in particular library lists, and I'll give you something that makes that easier. And I'll show you how to create an additional controller in action using the Zend tool again. So that's what we'll get to today, which is enough to see a sample project running, at least doing a hello world or reading some data for you. First thing is setting up SSH, secure shell. Secure shell, yes. It's the best way to connect. So you set up this daemon on IBM I, and that's your server, and then the client is Zend Studio. Now I'll show you how to do both. And this, you only have to do this once per IBM I. You can create many, many projects out of this one connection. I will give credit to the young I professionals. I think Tony Carnes actually posted this wiki article. This is where the article is. Brian May has also popularized this. If you're on 6.1 or higher of IBM I operating system, it's really, really easy. That's why it's good to keep your operating system up to date. One command, start TCP server, start SSHD. That creates the public private key pairs you need, and it starts the server for you. Very easy. If you're on v5r4, which is the lowest version that's supported by Zend and IBM, you need two major steps. You've got to go into the Pays environment and then run these commands. Each one of these is like these 3 lines is like one command, but it's word wrapping. Another command, another command. Do those 3 things. That creates the key pairs, and then you have to do this command in Pays to actually start SSHD, which is the daemon process. So you can see it's easier in 6.1, but it'll work in 5.4 also. And then this secure shell, you can use this with other clients besides Zend Studio. So it's well worth your time to do it. Now, so Zend Studio does provide this SSH client built in. If you've used Zend Studio, you know that it operates with a system of perspectives. Perspectives are like miniature applications that all work together. The problem is sometimes it's hard to find them. People don't know they exist. But I was at ZendCon this fall, and Roy Gaynor was answering complaints about Zend Studio, and he said, "You've got to master your tools. Master your tools." So I decided I'm going to master my tools and learn how to find these perspectives in Zend Studio, and it's been well worth the time. They're really excellent once you locate them. So here's one called Remote Systems Perspective. Go to the Windows menu, then Perspective, or Perspectives, then Remote Systems. And then you click this button that says Define a Connection to Remote System. And you will see this screen here. The first thing you do is you choose SSH. You'll be given a choice there. And on the right side, type the host name you want to connect to, which is your I. You give it a connection name, which here I called IBM I_SSH, but it could be anything. And then you give a description for it. And that's it to create the connection. There, we did it. And you'll see 2 things. If you don't, you can find them by restoring a window. Maybe click a restore button. But if you're lucky, you will see Remote Systems on the left. And notice this name I gave it, IBM I_SSH. And underneath, there's a folder for SFTP files, then a home directory, and then root. And these are all the files on my IFS, if I have authority to them. And maybe even better, or almost as good, on the right, there's a remote shell, which gives you an SSH shell. And normally people would use like PuTTY or tools like that to get in. It's a true Unix shell, maybe even more authentic than Pays terminal. So you can do all kinds of things in here. Down at the bottom, you can see maybe I did an LS or a list of a directory that's showing me the results. Zend Studio gives you an all-in-one environment that can do just about everything. If only you can find a perspective. It's a good one. Anyway, and here's a list of shell commands that you can use in that terminal window. We'll show you a few of them today. So you want to create a project, you need to create a directory. And here's a typical pattern: is this www and then some directory project name and then htdocs. That's standard for the web, not just with Zend or PHP. And today we'll show you an example, ZF demo is what we'll call it. Now you need to create the directory. There are 2 ways. One is from a 5250 screen. Maybe you're familiar with an MD, make directory. First you create the parts that don't exist a step at a time. So you may have to create the ZF demo folder first, and then ZF demo htdocs as 2 steps. But since we're interested in learning more about SSH, I suggest to use the remote shell we just saw and use the make directory command here, mkdir. And you can do it in 1 step. If you provide this -p, it means create any parent folders if necessary. I think that's nice. That means you just do this in 1 step. Make dir -p, www, zfdemo, htdocs, press enter. Then you, in the same line, you could type this ls command, ls with the path you just created, or if you're on a green screen, type work link and the path you created to make sure it exists. So I think this is rather convenient to do. Now you have a folder. Next, you've got to fill the folder with something, because right now it's empty. And you'll fill it with a project. So I mentioned before there's a component in Zend Framework called Zend Tool. And this was created in response to people's questions about, it's tricky to set up all these folders, I don't know what to set up. We see so many different examples on the web. What do I do? Other frameworks have automatic stuff. So we have Zend tool, which really does the job very effectively. It will create your project structure for you. So what's been done is there's a command line interface. You've heard me talk, if you've seen my talks, I talk about command line PHP or batch PHP. Well, there's a command line interface for Zend tool. So it's called ZF, appropriately enough. It exists in a Unix environment or PACE environment, and it also is built into Zend Studio. And if you really like going into PACE or Terminal, you can use it there. And it's also good if you work on Linux systems to learn that. But because on the IBM I we get Zend Studio free, I decided to show how to use Zend tool from Zend Studio. Use that as our environment to do everything. And you can get to that through a menu, the Zend tool menu off the project menu. But I like the keyboard shortcut Control 2. Control 2. You'll learn to love that. Some of you may be using another way to do this, to create a project, which is under the File menu. There's a new, Create New Zend Framework Project Wizard. But underneath, it really just uses the Zend Framework commands. If you have a console open, you can actually see that. You see that it's actually calling the Zend Framework, Zend tool commands. So it's actually a good way to learn the Zend tool by seeing what the new wizard does. But today, because the tool itself can do more, it can do almost anything you want, so I'm going to teach that, the Zend tool option. And here's what it looks like. So you're not confused. You see in the upper left, there's this little ZF button. That's how you close the window, the tool window. And you type your command here. There's this drop-down so you can see your previous commands that you typed, which is really nice. It's the equivalent of like an F9 if you're used to IBM I command windows. Here's how you launch it. Now there's a trick. There's kind of a trick. First, go to this PHP Explorer pane, which is this icon here with the two nodes on it, and click somewhere in this window. It doesn't matter where you click. Click somewhere here, because that will initialize Zend tool so it can run. I think it may be a slight bug, but in any case, just do it. You'll be fine. Then go to the project menu and choose Zend tool with a big ZF next to it, and that launches Zend tool. Or again, Control +2 is really nice shortcut. And so now, create the project. Let's call it ZF Demo because we created a folder structure like that. You have your Zend tool window open. First, you go to the root of the Studio workspace, and you type this command, ZF create project ZF Demo. And that's it. That's it. And then just refresh your view with F5 or File menu refresh. And there you go. Your project structure is there. It exists in Studio's workspace. Okay, so it's like on your PC in Zend Studio. You can edit your application, do whatever you want, but it's not on the IFS yet. So we want to get it onto the IFS as well. At least most of us do. That's how I work. I create a connection to the IFS so it can synchronize back and forth. So recall that before we created a remote server connection, that was with SSL, right? So right-click on the project. You have an option for remote server support. And then you can set that up for the project. And this is something, I have to admit, is not easy to find unless you know. So that's why you're watching this webinar, so you can find out the straight path to go through and set everything up. So here on this page here, you click Enable Remote Connection Properties. It's a checkbox. You have a drop-down that has all the remote connections you set up before, which you'll find that the IBM I_SSH is there from before. Type the project directory. That's the actual directory on the IFS from the root level that you want your project to be synchronized with. So that's why I typed www zfdemo htdocs. And remember, we created that earlier. And then this part here is the default. You want files to be uploaded every time you save. So that means in Studio, when you edit your code, edit your PHP code, you click Save or Control S, and the project will automatically be uploaded to the IFS from your workspace. You don't have to do it that way. If you have a slow internet connection, you could instead do it manually only, but I have on save. So I think a number of people got confused because Zend Studio changed the connection methods and techniques between the versions, like from 6, 7, and 8. So what I'm showing you applies to Zend Studio 8. And it does work. It definitely works if you follow the steps. So after you click OK on that screen, you'll be asked, do you want to upload all files to the remote server? And say yes, and finish. And at that point, your files will be uploaded. And you could even go into your green screen, do a work link or something, and you'd see them there. See your files in the IFS. Next, this is another part people ask about, configuring Apache. Because Zend Server comes with a default Apache configuration, but you need to do something additional for each project you want to set up. Because of security and because of what I showed you before, how there's only one PHP file called index.php that's world accessible through the web. So you've got to protect that. So that's what we do. And I'll show you how to do that. You may notice that in your project structure there's a folder called public. And in web terminology, that's the document root. That means any files you have really get served out of that by the web server. Only the files in your document root normally will get automatically served to anybody who wants them through the web. The other folders contain files that are hidden from the web, and you use them as you need to in your application by using includes. You include them, but no one can get to them directly. How do we do that? In our Apache configuration, we set up the document root, and then we set up rewrite rules to force all Zend Framework requests to go to this index.php. And then Zend Framework has a router that will look at the original request and then interpret it. By default, you get a file called htaccess.htaccess, but it's not recommended to use that for performance reasons and security reasons, especially on the IBM I, where reading IFS files may be slower than on other systems. So I'll show you how to put your complete configuration inside the main configuration file. So get ready. The next slide has a lot of lines on it in very small type. I fit the Apache configuration, or actually one part, the virtual host part, on one page. So just adjust your glasses. You'll be able to come back later and copy and paste this for yourself, okay? So don't panic. Here it is. All right. I extracted this from the Zend Server conf httpd.conf file, which comes by default with Zend Server. So you're still using your main Zend Server Apache configuration, but you're setting up multiple virtual hosts inside. The virtual host is like a miniature configuration inside a configuration where you can change anything you want. And I'd say the most important part is this line that says document root. That's really the cause of a lot of this, is that we want to make that public folder, as you can see here, make that the document root. Next thing I'll show you is that we have a location section, which is saying that what these lines say is that any requests that come in that are not a static file, meaning not a directory, not a file, but anything that's a URL asking for a particular Zend Framework type of resource, will be directed to this index.php file. That's what that's saying. Force through. It really protects you. Make sure no one can run any PHP code that you haven't authorized them to run. Another aspect here is this allow override none. That means we're not going to look for any .htaccess files because our whole configuration is here. You see that we're listening. This listen function, this listen command means that the web server will be aware of a certain IP and port combination that the user is typing in the browser. This can be anything you want. You should use port 80 if you want it to be a public site, or port 443 for an SSL encrypted site. Just make sure you're consistent. Change it in one place, change it everywhere. The server name is being more specific about the IP address, whereas the host definition is just saying use any IP with a specific port. So you could really copy and paste this into your configuration and change the IP addresses and the ports, and you'll be okay. One more note. Do any of you know what this name virtual host does? Name virtual host means that you can share a single IP address and port among many, many projects and differentiate between them based on the domain name the person typed. So I could have the same IP address and a port 80 among many projects, but then I could actually set up different domain names pointing to the same IP address, and I specify the domain name here. So like if you have some public websites on port 80, you can share a single IP address and the port 80. So that's just a little tip for you. As you get into it, you'll learn. But again, now you don't have to completely understand it at this point. So once you've copied that in, you can restart Apache using this command or using the Zend server menu. At that point, you actually will have a project that runs, a basic project. And if you run it with the server and port number that you had specified before, it will work, and you just say, you click that in your browser, and this project will come up. I think that's a big moment. have some champagne ready. Hey, what else can we do? Well, we can create more resources using Zend Tool, and one will be a controller in action. I didn't really explain what the controllers and actions are. If you learn about Zend Framework, that's one of the first things you'll learn. But the controller in action is a way of organizing your content on your site. So I'll show an example of that. Like, say you want to show some information about customers. You might have your URL. Actually, I'm going to send a message to all participants here. Your URL might be like domain.port/customer list. I'm sending this to everybody through the WebEx. That's an example of where you can see the customer is the controller and list is the action. The customer is the main application area, and then the action is a specific activity you want to see. So in this case, we want to create a controller called customer, and then to show a list of customers and call it list. And these are names that you create yourself. There's nothing about them that's special. It's how you want your users to see the organization of your project or application. So how you do it is you launch the Zend Tool window, and you do ZF create controller customer, and that will create the controller called customer. Actually, I left something out. I'm going to send something else to you. For that, you need to do this. I just sent something else to all participants. In the Zend Tool window, you want to go to the root of the project first to make sure that the controller is created in the correct project. Okay? So you CD to ZF demo, and then you do the create controller. And then you create the list. ZF create action list in the customer controller. And you press F5 to refresh. So I don't know if that's clear to any of you, but it's something you do, and it works. And you can see it work. I believe the next slide, yes, it shows you that once you do that, within the controllers folder, you'll see customer controller.php. And this is the naming convention that Zend Framework uses. Okay, it takes the name of the controller and it attaches it to the word controller. Okay. Now, and then inside that, we created a list action. So there it is. We said the action is called list. It's called list action. And if you double-click on list action, actually on the customer controller file, you'll see this, public function list action. So what's great about Zend Tool is it saves you a lot of typing. So within list action, you type in whatever code you need to happen if someone goes to the list action. Okay, everybody with me? And this is a very basic aspect of Zend framework, is creating your, okay, someone wrote he's with me, okay, good, controllers and actions. Now here's another part that if you didn't have someone to show you, you really probably couldn't get it to work the way you want, at least on IBM I. Configuring the ZendDB adapter for DB2 on IBM I. Okay, this part will be easy. This part is simple, and it's documented. You need some settings. You need the adapter type, which is DB2. It could easily be MySQL or anything almost. What's nice about ZendDB is that it abstracts away the specific type of database that you want to use. So you could use a different database type with the same code virtually. Username, password, DB name, which should be from work database, relational database entries. I think that should be RDBE. Got to fix that in the mix, right, Kevin? Okay. That should be work RDB directory. That should be work RDB DIRE, work database relational database directory entries. Anyway, that shows you what databases are defined in your IBM I. But you can leave it blank. You leave your user and password blank if you want to. Now here's your ZF command. It's long. This should be really one line here. Configure DB adapter, and then within quotes this long string. In this case, I'm saying DB2, passing in a username of Alan, secret PW, and star local. And then these resources will be created in an application.ini file. We haven't looked at it yet, but you'll see if you go in there that it creates these 4 lines for you, which is a nice starting point. It prevents typos. Moving along, here are some more items that you may want to enter in your application.ini. You may want to type this in, identify the project as I5. You may want to use a persistent database connection or not. It's up to you. You'll get better performance if you do, if you know what you're doing. Auto commit on is the default to make sure your inserts, updates, and deletes get committed right away. Now this one is interesting. This I5 naming, I don't know how many of you know what this is, but in the normal world of SQL, if you have a schema or a library, you use a dot to separate it from the file or table name. But on IBM I, we often use a slash. And if you want to use special features such as a library list, you need to use the slash. Or if you want to leave out the library altogether, you need to set up this I5 naming convention. And the setting is called DB2 I5 naming on. But I'll show you in a minute that normally, with the current code base, that won't work, but I have a fix for it. Then you can also set up your library list. This is one way to do it. You could do it through a user profile, job description, or other ways, but this is one nice way to do it, is to specify them on the line like this, I5_LIBL. Okay, even more. Again, you can look these up later, exactly what they do, but if you use the ZendDB table component, you may want to specify that this database is your default adapter. It'll save you some code. And something I love is you can do profiling of your queries to see how the queries are performing and to find out what SQL is being run. So you specify these, and then if you have Firebug installed on your Firefox browser, you can actually see your queries in the browser. Just showing you that just to let you know that you can do a lot with your configuration. Are we done? No. I have one more very important thing to show you about DB2. You need to install a fix for this because the default DB2 adapter doesn't work with the DB2 I5 naming by default. Okay, it hard codes up a period to separate library and file name. But I have a fix. I worked on it with an anonymous helper within Zend. We did it together. And I have a use-at-your-own-risk adapter, but it works for me, and everyone I sent it to says it works for them. You can download from my site. There's a zip file, and you extract it, and there's an instruction set in db2.php, which is the name of the adapter script. What you do is you create a folder under your library directory called, this namespace I call the strategic because that's the company I work for, but it could be your company name. and then create DB adapter, and then put the DB2 there. And if you change the namespace, you change it in the folder name, and you change it in the class name. So this way it doesn't conflict with the regular Zend adapter. So I want to emphasize this will be fixed in Zend Framework itself soon, but the Zend team has rigorous testing standards. So it won't get into Zend Framework until it's rigorously tested, which I believe is underway now. But meanwhile, you'll be fine. You can use what I sent you. It will work. Second thing is, in your application.ini, you let the framework know that you're using your special customized adapter. And by the way, this is a wonderful aspect of open source and the structure of Zend Framework, that you can override elements that you need to customize without having to change the base code at all. So if you update Zend Framework, your code will still work. So what this is really helping you with is making sure that library lists work properly. That's one of the important things. When Zend Framework is updated to work with all of this, then in an official tested release, then you could comment out the application.ini line above. So I hope that's clear. You can ask about it in the Q&A afterward, but I assure you this works pretty well. Okay, now we've got DB2 adapter set up. We will just show you how to access a table, data in a table. And the reason I'm showing this method is because ZendTool sets it up for us, and it's really popular to use ZendDB table. I actually use the Select and other kinds of ZendDB classes more, but this way does work. So here's our ZF line that we're creating with ZendTool. We're typing in it, rather. You type in the name of the table class you want to create, and then the actual name of the table. And I had a table called custfile. It's a real file from one of my customers, clients, so I'm calling it custfile. It has an uppercase name, so I'm making it uppercase here. So if you type that, and it will create this models folder, DB table folder inside that, and custfile. I always had a question in my mind of what structure to use, what folder structure to use, but you need worry no more. This is created for you. And you see that by default, the name of the table is given just the way you specified it. In this case, I added an additional line to my code. And this is all documented in Zend Framework documentation very clearly, but that if the primary primary key name is not ID, you have to specify it here in the class. So that's what I did. It was custno. So I specified it there. Here's some code to actually read the records using what we just created. Remember we made an action in our customer controller called list? So I added 3 lines of code there to my list action. I created an instance of the custfile class that we just saw created. I do a fetch all on it. And then I tell our view where the data is. I give the view to our data. And this is really the MVC, model view controller, in action. It's all together. Like this is part of the controller. This is accessing a model, and then I give the data to the view. And in the view script itself, I have some simple HTML. I didn't show all the stylings here, but this is the basics. That we basically loop through the list of customers, and I output them as a table. I'll show you the results on the next page. There it is. Customer list. I don't know who this Pavlak guy is. I always like having names with an apostrophe in it because it's good for testing if it breaks your SQL. If you're concatenating your SQL, it's always a good one to try out. Okay, we did it. We actually we worked with DB2. We created a controller in action. And you know you can do it. This really will work for you. You can use these slides. Now we'll have questions in a minute, but the slides will be on my website and the recording will be on Zend's site. I will continue to update these slides through the spring. I'll be presenting them at a couple of conferences, so as I find areas to correct or feedback I get or easier ways to do things, I will continue to update them on my site. Okay? And please, this is an ongoing process. We're all in the community. We're all helping each other to make this as easy as possible because Zend Framework really is good. So, I would like to open this up to questions. I see there's one question, will this presentation be available as a video from William? Yes, it will be available on Zend's website where you will see the slides and the audio put together. Any other questions? Okay, I see Kevin answered that. Also on Facebook. Another question. And Kevin, you can jump in if you want, if there's a question you would like to direct me to.
Well, why don't we start kind of at the top there.
Okay.
There's a question here that says, this is important. Can you give more time on this? I cannot use Zend Studio to connect. I'm assuming that this is talking about the remote connection, which is, I believe, a new feature in Studio 8, which is really pertinent for the IBM I, because a lot of developers, because they need to work on directly on the I because of things like the i5 toolkit and stuff like that. They can't work locally the same way that they often can elsewhere. So I think that what he's asking about is about the remote connection. Is there any additional information that you can give on that, or is it just kind of does it work exactly as advertised?
It will work as advertised. I just think that with each version of Zend Studio, there were some changes, and some ideas that used to work don't work anymore. But overall, this is an improvement. The team really made the SSH and SFTP work better than the old ways. So, and the support is more stable and fast. So, William, I think if you try exactly what's here, it will work for you. If it doesn't work, then let me know. Send me a note. Let me know. But I think or contact Zend support. But it will work.
Right, next question is, how do you overcome permission issues when you SFTP files over in the Zend core? I now have given the user profile nobody access to the files I just uploaded. I have a command line script that recursively gives nobody permission to access the files.
Mm-hmm.
So
in this case, you're actually, I don't know if I showed you, you do supply user and password when you connect with SSH. So, Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, but that user and password will be the authority that gives you authority to SSH on your server. So you should be able to do a similar idea with that, whatever user you set up.
Yeah, and I think that what he's talking about here is the nobody user that typically the Apache user runs under. And actually what you don't want to do is give change the ownership to the user of the web server. Because if that's the case, then what you can actually end up having happen is that the web server has permission then to overwrite files that are on there. So just in case there's some kind of a permissions issue, it is possible for someone from the outside world to come in and write their own data onto your file system. So what we typically will recommend is that your application files are readable by the web server, but not owned by the web server specifically for that security issue.
Mm-hmm. That sounds good, yeah. Right.
And then down, is there any problems with using persistent connect on a DB2 connection? Does it create the connection once per session?
Yeah, no, it works fine. No, persistent connection is really good, and it's recommended to save some CPU and save time. You just have to. It works okay. If you create persistent connections, it can group them in various ways. It can group them by the user ID that you specified when you connect to DB2. I really do recommend using them as long as you don't need to get like exclusive access to the tables that you're accessing, because a persistent connection means that there'll be kind of a shared lock on those tables.
Yeah, and
go ahead.
I was going to say the thing to remember too is that with a persistent connection, it's not like a database pool where you have 20 individual connections. Each individual process is going to have a single connection for each username and password combination. So if you're doing something where you have explicit permissions that you use, where people log in with different usernames and passwords, you can actually end up having a lot of connections going to your database. And persistent connections, what we had found a while ago was that they typically involved an overhead of about 300 to 400 milliseconds when you didn't do it. So you actually saved 300 to 400 milliseconds on your time when you use persistent connections.
Right, Kevin, that's a great point. There's actually some information on this on the Zend forums from Tony Carnes about how to use persistent connections properly. As Kevin said, you don't want to set up too many users with persistent connections. You want to use a couple of user IDs for that. And there are probably some other caveats too, but it's worth using. It will save a lot of performance time in your application.
Yeah, it's basically a wasted CPU time if you don't use it because of the amount of overhead involved in initiating that connection.
Right.
Next question is here. Are there any examples of how to set the library list from a job description?
There isn't an example here in the webinar, but it definitely can be done. I wonder if there's some on the Zend knowledge base. Maybe we'll get back to that person because I've in the days before this explicit library list setting was available, I used to use the job description method all the time. So,
yeah, I'm not aware of any specific examples with doing that.
Okay, but what you do is you set up whatever user that you use for your DB2 security, your DB2 connection. That user is associated with the job description, and that job description should have a library list associated with it. If you do that, then that library list will apply to your connection that you're using in DB2. So maybe I'll send a tip out about that at some point. Different ways. That'd be a good tip or an article about different ways to set up a library list, DB2 Connect. I see one from Jim Oberholzer about that star local is not good in a box with an IASP or for other IBM I instances. He says don't use star local. Okay, so you don't have to. You can leave it blank or use the actual system name in the remote database screen. I think star local was the traditional way to do it, but Jim is saying that it's not that good. So you have many options there besides star local.
All right, next question is, for a real web application on the IBM I, how do you manage authentication and access control of users? Should it be a system user profile or independent? Where do you choose to put that logic in a Zend MVC application?
Okay, let me see. I was reading something else. Could you say that again? I was reading someone else's question.
For a web application on the IBM I, how do you manage authentication and access control of users? Should it be a system user profile or independent? Where do you choose to put that logic in a Zend MVC application? I think that there's two questions in there, really.
Yeah, it says where to store the user definitions, right? Which could be a database. I personally don't use user profiles in my web applications. I don't like actual system user profiles to be associated with people on the outside. Some people do that. I don't do it. I use a database or, in some cases, Active Directory or an LDAP server. The second question was about how to actually manage the authentication and authorization. The Zend framework has components, ZendAuth and ZendACL, that can do that for you, or there are pieces that you can use in the process. It works pretty well. You can set up different ways to do it, pre-dispatch plugin. But so you can learn about that in training courses, or I think even the Quick Start has it. Kevin, do you want to add anything?
No, I think that typically if you're doing any kind of authentication or access control, you would do it, like you said, some point after route shutdown. Because at that point, after the route shutdown, and this we didn't go too much into plugins here. I don't recall seeing much about plugins.
Right.
But you can hook an ACL system directly into the request structure of an MVC application. And typically a plugin is a good place to do that because you can manipulate the routing of the request between the various controllers.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you can do then is you can query your ACL immediately after route shutdown, which is where you have available the current module, controller, and action combination that's going to be executed. So anytime between route shutdown and pre-dispatch are good places to put that, and I usually just tend to do that in route shutdown.
Okay. I'm a pre-dispatch man myself, but route shutdown sounds good.
I just do that because then that'll be the absolute first thing that executes immediately after the route is figured out.
Okay, well,
but it's not like it's a right or wrong answer. It's just that's the way I do it.
No. Well, I'm going to try that in the future.
Okay.
So, do we have other? We have like 5 minutes or so. Any other questions here?
Yeah, there's one here. Is Zend tool only available in the PHP perspective?
You have to click on PHP Explorer. I don't think that it's intentionally done that way, but that's the way in Zend Studio version 8 it is, that you have to click on the PHP Explorer for it to work, that I found. Otherwise, I think nothing comes up when you choose Zend tool otherwise. Is that right, Kevin?
Yeah, pretty much. You have to be in either the PHP or the Zend framework perspective, and then when you're actually in there, you have to have the PHP Explorer itself have the focus, and then you can hit Control to bring up the ZF control box.
Okay.
Next question is, how does Zend Framework handle fetching from blob fields?
Okay. So under the covers, Zend Framework is really using the normal DB2 adapter, DB2 driver. So I don't know if I really have any special comments on that. Kevin, do you have any thoughts about anything Zend Framework does, fetching blob fields?
Off the top of my head, I don't have anything specific. What I tend to do is I would end up using the PDO. Actually, either one of them would work, because what that allows you to do is fetch a blob field as a resource. And if you fetch it as a resource, then you can do an fread off of it, or a file get contents off of, no, not a file get contents, it has to be an fread. And so you can read it as if it were a file on your system. Though generally what we tend to recommend away from using blobs, simply because they're kind of like a pseudo file. And a lot of that stuff really, we would question whether or not a blob is something that truly belongs in a database as opposed to some kind of a remote file store.
And in the past, with our IBM _DB2 driver, there used to be some problems with blobs. I think they've been fixed, but I kind of tend to shy away also.
Yeah. So okay. There are ways of doing it, and it's great to be able to use it as a resource. But generally, we'll recommend away from doing that simply because a file store is a more natural fit for most blob type data. Next question is it okay to use regular DB2 naming? What is the benefit of using I5 naming? Oh,
well, yeah, you can use regular DB2 naming, but I5 naming is required if you want to use this. First of all, you want to use library lists. So if you want to use the special IBM I features of DB2, like I think library lists is probably the main one, then you need to use the I5 naming. Yep.
Okay, and we got about a minute left here, so we just have time really for one more question. And how should INI files that contain passwords be secured in IFS?
Files that contain passwords?
Yes.
Well, I think you should really encrypt the passwords or hash the passwords. I don't think you should try to avoid having plain text passwords stored. You can work with permissions on the files to try to hide them from people, but still somebody in your organization could get in and see it. So I would try to avoid having plain text passwords stored.
I also think too that this is a persistent problem that we have to deal with because PHP in and of itself is a scripting language, and having passwords in any files is just kind of the nature of the beast.
Right.
It's kind of unfortunate that there isn't a really good way around it, but there's always, if you're going to be decrypting something, there has to be some kind of a key, and that key has to be readable by the application. If it's not readable by the application, you can't decrypt it, and so you kind of have a chicken or the egg problem. And you can basically just, if you want to keep it secure, your PHP application won't be able to read it, and if you want your PHP application to read it, you have to have it unencrypted in there.
So if the person was referring to the application.ini file and the DB2 password, then yes, I do have the password stored in there. I try not to make it. Don't put your most valuable passwords in there. Maybe put it that way.
Mm-hmm. And also too, if you are doing something based off of local authentication, then you can just have people store their passwords in there as well. It's a question that I personally am also trying to find a good answer to. And right now, as far as I know, there isn't a good answer yet.
Okay.
Unless somebody else has, besides limiting the user permissions. It still has to be readable by the web server.
Do we have time for any more questions, or are we?
I think we're pretty much out of time, unfortunately.
Okay. So people can download the slides. There was the Facebook site from somebody asked if they get a PHP elephant for attending. The answer is no. But you can download the slides. Sign up for tips on my site, alanseiden.com/tips. Get in contact. Stay in contact with Zend, and we'll keep this community really progressing with Zend Framework. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alan. Be sure to check back on the Zend.com website or the Zend Facebook page for a recording of this video. But we thank you for your time and hope to see you again at another Zend webinar.